Hello and welcome to Hex Encountered. I'm Joe, and it is Sports Edition Saturday here on the channel. And this time I want to do something a little different. First of all, I'm not home, as you might be able to figure out. I'm in a hotel room because I'm traveling for business. So, with that being the situation, I wanted to try to do something that, or I maybe am forced to do something that's a little bit outside what I would normally try to do here, and that is mainly instead of actually playing a game, I wanted to talk about fictional historical sports games and linking them together, and a project that I have that I may probably have mentioned at one point or more points earlier, which is called the Figment Sports Universe, which is something that I do. And it is computer simulations based and not tabletop. Now, a few weeks back, I did videos on, I think it was Face to the Mat at that time that I was doing from Play Games. And I talked about doing kind of a linked kind of fictional thing for the 70s. So Figment is in that vein, but it's set earlier, although it started way back when. So what I'm going to do here is this is going to probably end up being more like a podcast. There won't be a lot of video content, and I'm not going to do it all on camera. Um, I'll put up some graphics or something just to kind of, keep it relatively simple. You can just listen to it instead of having to feel like you need to watch it. Although I will put up some things here and there. But anyway, the main gist of this is I want to go through my thoughts on playing fictional with both tabletop games and computer games, and how that can be certainly a different experience from playing, a typical like replay type simulation. You buy your Stratomatic season and you play the season with your favorite team, or you do a draft league or whatever it may be. Basically, you're playing with real players, and they're based on their seasonal performance or whatever from that particular season. Fictional historical opens up a whole new kind of air. It's full of potentialities. Let's say there are a lot of different things you can do with it, and I want to talk about some of that. So, without further ado, I guess let's get started.
Before we get into the specifics of the Figment universe, I want to talk a bit about what attracted me to do a fictional universe in the first place. Well, like a lot of sports simulation game enthusiasts, I spent literally decades doing replays and historical leagues. As a kid in the 80s, my first tabletop sports game was Title Bout. From there, it wasn't long until I started playing baseball games, Status Pro, Stratomatic, APA, and then finally the one that kind of really took off for me, Pursue the Pennant. Now, while that was going on, I was also beginning to use a personal computer, and I played baseball sims on my Commodore 64 and later on my IBM PC compatibles and etc. Now, when Pursue the Pennant became Diamond Mine Baseball for PC, that was my computer sim of choice. But it was a later game that really changed things up for me, and that was the very first version of Out of the Park Baseball. It was OOTP that ultimately opened the door to fictional leagues, and then fictional leagues in a historical setting. It was the ridiculous amount of customization options within OOTP that made fictional historical possible for me. Now I've played every single version. That's absolutely true. I've played every version of OOTP since that first one, and I have probably more hours playing that game than anything else I've ever played, tabletop or computer. And over the course of the last 25 years of playing OOTP, I've run a lot of online leagues. Most of them, in fact, virtually all of them, except for maybe a couple, were historical leagues. Playing with historical players across historical seasons, etc. And I also did the same thing with online leagues, both as a participant and as a commissioner, with both Diamond Mine and Stratomatic. So I have a lot of baseball sim online league experience, I guess you could say. It's from the standpoint of running leagues. So what I initially found enticing about fictional was the decoupling of that mentality that the participants in the league always had of, I'm a fan of such and such a team, Cubs, Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers, whatever it may be. and I want to run that team. Or that feeling of, I have Babe Ruth, it's the 1927 season, and he should hit 60 home runs or I'm going to be disappointed. With fictional, you lose all those types of rooting interests, preconceptions, etc. You're literally building your own rooting interests and favorite players and history and so on as you go. So with that in mind, I decided to do a baseball league that would cover the history of baseball from the 19th century until I got tired of doing it. Um, so what is now the Figment Universe started off as a single, solo, out of the park baseball league, and I called it, surprise, surprise, Figment League Baseball. That baseball league's now been running for about 7 years of real time. And you might wonder, well, what does that equal in terms of the number of seasons? Well, I started the league in 1876 as a solo project. So I was just playing it myself and kind of going through it relatively quickly. I progressed it to 1925, so that's 50 seasons. And at that point, I decided that I would make it into an online league. And that online league's been running since the 26th season, and we just completed 1950, so 25 more seasons. And we had an exciting 7-game championship series between the Continental Association champion Cleveland Foresters and our Federal Association champion New York Gothams. So as you can tell by the names I just used, while we follow basically the structure of MLB, we have two 18 leagues, the Continental Association and the Federal Association, and we play a 154 game schedule. So that's the historical piece. The framework around the sport itself is historical. So you'll have the era settings, the type of game being played on the field will follow historical norms. What OOTP lets you do is it has the ability to set the era settings for each season based on what really happened that season, and then it adjusts the engine basically to ensure that you get overall results that are fairly close. Really close. It really does an excellent job. It's really close to what you would expect from playing, a dead ball season or a steroid era season or whatever it may be, up to and including today, of course. So, with 75 seasons under its belt, Figment's baseball organization, which I named the Federally Aligned Baseball Leagues, which is FABL, but I call it Fable for short, it has a lot of history. Now, for a while, I did seasonal recaps and I posted them on my website, legendsport.com, which is the home website for the Figment Sports Universe. Eventually, some of the members of the league started writing their own content based on their teams and players and the league overall, and they were posting it. And this is ongoing, so this isn't something that's done and over with. This is ongoing. They posted on the OOTP development forums in the Dynasty area. So the Dynasty area, if you're not familiar with it, is just an area where people post their recaps of what they're doing with the game. So we have several of those that are done by guys who are in the league. I have my own thread there as well about the first family of the Figment universe that I kind of came up with to kind of put a little personal spin on it. It's kind of over the top a little bit in terms of their impact on sports overall, but it's a family whose patriarch, shall we say, was named Rufus. Their last name is Barrell, although it's spelled Barrell, so it sounds like barrel, or you might think it's barrel. It's Barrell. But Rufus was the patriarch, as I said, and he had 9 sons, and all those sons all did various things. Some of them played baseball like Rufus did, although Rufus became a scout. And I'll put links to everything in the description. So if you want to read it, it's a very, very long story that starts in 1890, I think, if I remember correctly, or 89 maybe, and goes all the way through. I think the last thing I did was probably in 49 or so. So you're talking about, what is that, 60 years. But to get back on topic, I found myself having so much fun with this baseball league that I eventually started branching it out within the same universe to other sports. So boxing was first because one of Rufus's sons was made him into a fighter, and he became a heavyweight. And that didn't stick very much because I was using an older game called Title Bout Championship Boxing, which is also published or was published by OOTP Developments. Sim is good, but um, it's hard. It lets you run really big universes and everything, but it's a little bit time consuming to do so. So I kind of shifted out of that, but it's been picked up by one of the league members, and he continues to run title fights and things like that. So boxing is a part of the Figment universe. From boxing, I then added hockey, and then football, and finally basketball. Each of these other sports presented challenges from a simulation engine standpoint because there's no sim for any of the other sports that has the deep customization and ability to mimic historical styles of play, generate historically accurate statistics in the same way that OOTP does for baseball. For hockey, I kind of bounced back and forth between Simon T Hockey Sim and Franchise Hockey Manager, or FHM, which is an OOTP published game. Now, I like STHS, but it requires a lot of manual rating and tweaking settings to get your results to be close to historically accurate, and it can't quite get there for old hockey, the old time stuff, pre-war, pre-World War II. Um, like in the 1920s, for example. Hockey was a much different game then. FHM's a little bit better, but it's buggy and it isn't as customizable as the baseball game is, which I find a little bit ironic based on the fact that it's published by the same company, but they have different development teams and they have things much more locked down in the hockey game than they do in the baseball game. Now, football presented a challenge as well because early football was almost exclusively running. We're talking in the 20s now. Much more run oriented, so you ended up having, you know, um, games that were, the kicking game was not developed, and it was just a vastly different sport than it is today, where, everybody throws the ball all over the place and quarterbacks put up gaudy numbers and things like that. So there really isn't a game that can do a career mode that way. Now, there are some games like Second and 10, which is what I've been using, that can get you pretty accurate statistics and results. Action PC can do it as well. It's a little weaker in the 20s, in my opinion. Um, and Second and 10 doesn't even attempt to do the 20s. So, but after 32, when the NFL started keeping statistics, those two games are pretty solid at giving you, reasonably realistic statistics, but they're not career based. They're seasonal. So every season I have to create my players, and you know, it's a bit of a chore, let's say. So I'm hoping to be able to transition into something like Draft Day Sports Football, which is a good solid sim, but it also is very modern day oriented, which is what you would expect from most sports simulations. Because it is, like I said, it's hard to model the various changes in all these sports. And the same was true of basketball. Obviously, basketball in the 40s and the 50s and before then was vastly different than it is today. Vastly, vastly different. Shooting percentages were low. For some of this time, there was no jump shot. There was no shot clock. Players were a lot less athletic and shorter. The dunk was illegal for a while, a long time actually, and it was a more rough game. They called them cagers because they literally played in a cage to keep fans from throwing bottles onto the court and things like that. So to model that is very difficult, and the sim I use, which actually does a pretty good job because it gives you the ability to tweak the engine itself, is Fast Break Basketball. Now, this is a game that's more than a decade old, but it gives you good results. So that's what I've been using for basketball, and it works pretty well. So if you're still with me, you may be wondering, why I'm doing this. And there are a couple reasons. One, I really enjoy doing these fictional historical things, and I think that there is at least a subset of people who play simulation games that would enjoy it as well. Now, how would you do it yourself? Well, you could mimic what I do um, and use computer simulations, which makes the tracking of the statistics and the playing of the games and so on easy because you have the computer doing all the work. But I know some people, and I am like this myself to some extent, like to play tabletop games. Roll the bones and let things develop that way. Get that tactile sense of control to some extent. Um, and you can do this with tabletop games, especially if you play the play games. Keith Avalone has fictional sets for most of his games, not all, but most. And you can use that, um, obviously, to do your own things. You can also buy the how-to guides, which he also publishes for, he has them for sale to allow you to rate your own players. I actually did this for History Maker Baseball. I created a 1940s league using names of men who were killed during the Second World War as kind of a Memorial Day tribute to these people who made the ultimate sacrifice for freedom during that war. And Keith actually posted it in the newsletter. This was done back when he had a newsletter. Now he's kind of moved on to doing videos and posting news and stuff on the website, which is totally fine, obviously. But anyway, you can buy these guides that will tell you how to rate players. Now you can also do it for other games as well. It's probably a little bit more work. Some people have figured out how to rate Stratomatic players. So you could do that as well, just as an example. The thing with sports games, tabletop sports games, is generally speaking, for everything that's not a play game, or most things that aren't play games, I guess, I shouldn't say all, is that they're all based on probability, right? So you have dice and you have, statistical chances of each die roll coming up with a specific number, and you can translate that to generate results that match, actual results on the field. So, it gets complicated depending on the engine, but there are simple games too. You can also use kind of a combination. Some games have fast result tables or are just flat out fast result games, and you can maybe play a single team that you like with, any type of set of fictional players you want. They could be your family and friends or whatever, or just names you make up. And, you can use that and create that and use a fast play engine for the other sports, or the other teams rather. And you can do this for one sport, multiple sports, whatever you want. It's wide open. That's the nice thing. Just like most of sports gaming. I mean, you can do this with real players and teams as well, of course. Some of the things that I personally think about when I try to do this is I use a name generator. I gathered, census names and stuff. All of this is on the internet if you want to find it, name probabilities and so on, surnames from the census and so on and so forth. There are fictional name generator websites out there where you can say, give me 10 names of Americans from the 1920s, and it'll spit out names for you. Whatever you want to do is fine. Now, OOTP, for example, has a name set, which is an XML file, and I don't want to get overly technical. If you know what an XML file is, then you'll know what I'm talking about. It's a text file, but it's formatted. and you can create your own name file to use, and it'll account for things like nationality and so on and so forth. It's a lot of work to kind of tweak it, but it is possible to do it. Back in the older versions, it was a flat text file with just a long list of names with a couple commas and some numbers that indicate what nation and the likelihood of that name being used. So if it was if it was Jim, let's say, or something like that, a really common name, John, then it would have a high probability. If it was something, Erasmus or something that's a lot more rare, then you might have a much lower number. So the things along that line. But as OOTP grew more complicated, I guess, or complex, maybe is a better way to put it, more complex, they went to an XML format, which is more complicated to edit, but it is still editable if you know what you're doing. So, that might be something you would want to think about. You can create your own fictional names for teams and leagues, which is what I do. It's a way to really be creative. So if you're a creative type person, then you can create your own fictional teams and players. You can create logos for these teams, etc. Um, and if you use, AI chat bots, you can ask for suggestions for period appropriate nicknames for sports teams, and it'll spit stuff out for you. You can use AI art if you want. I know some people are opposed to AI art for the reasons of it being based on the work of actual artists who are not compensated for that, and I understand that. But I also know a lot of people still use it. So you have a lot of tools out there now, especially as things have developed technically, that make this a lot easier to do if you wish to do it. Now, it's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. I understand that, but it is, in my opinion, a lot of fun, and it's an avenue, as I also mentioned, for some creativity. And if you find some like-minded folks, like I did with the Figment League, you can have a lot of fun. We have a Slack channel. It's pretty active. There are a core group of guys that have been in the league since the beginning, and we all get along really well. I run the league. I do not run any teams. This allows me to be neutral and act in my head. I see myself almost as like a dungeon master. I'm just running the game. It's almost like a role-playing game where you're role-playing being the general manager of a professional team, whether it's baseball or football or whatever. Um, so having said that, I do have some openings in the league, the baseball league. Football's not live as an online league yet. I'm waiting until we get a little bit further along in the NFL's development, but that should be within a few seasons. But I have openings in hockey, I have openings in basketball, and I have openings in baseball. So if you are interested in that, you can feel free to, if you go on legendsport.com, there's a contact us, I think. If not, there is certainly one on my hexencountered.com website to reach out to me. You can also email me at commish, COMMISH, at legendsport.com, and that will allow me to give you more information, or if you just want to explore, or you would like to take part, you would need to have the simulation game. So if you do have OOTP 25, we will be switching to that in the next week or so. So you would need that for baseball. You would need Fast Break Basketball for the basketball, and you would need Franchise Hockey Manager 10 for the hockey league. So that is going to do it. I hope you found it reasonably interesting. I know this is a very niche subject, but I know there are some of you out there that are probably interested, that play sports games, that might want to try something a little different. Something where you can be creative and create your own history and your own story. It's really a lot of fun. So if you're into narrative type stuff, you would probably enjoy this, assuming you like sports. But that's going to do it for now. I appreciate you guys taking the time to listen in this case. So until next time, I'm Joe. This is the sports edition of Hexed Encountered, and we will be back next week with a more normal type video, I promise. But yeah, that's going to do it for now. So until next time, like I said, I'm Joe. This is Hext Encountered. And as always, happy gaming.